So, welcome everybody. I have exactly 4 slides, which means that I won't spend so much time in PowerPoint, which I hope you like. And today we're going to talk about role-based access with protecting your APIs with role-based access in API management. So we will go through a little bit how that setup is done and a little bit about why and what. So this session will be me talking, it will be whiteboard drawing, and there will be demos. And I have about 2 more slides that I'm going to show you afterwards. So let's kick this off. So let's just go ahead and talk a little bit. Let's talk about role-based access. So role-based access is when you want to define a granular way of doing access control. So today we will look into API management, and let's go ahead and share my drawing because that makes things a little bit easier. So my favorite tool, the whiteboard. And today we have a setup called with API management, and we have API. Oh, sorry, we have an API called orders. In this one, we have a few more operations. So in this scenario, we will talk about role-based access. So by default, API management can give you access to your orders. So let's go ahead and draw this one to blue, because what you can do in API management is give access to my API called orders. This is the minimal way you can actually give access to an API management, which means that all operations inside of my API are exposed at the same level. So that will give access to. So if I have, in this case, a create, an update, a read all, read my orders, for instance, I will have access to all of these operations at the same time. This is the minimal part. So role-based access is more about granularity. So this means that we need to make it more granular than this. And the way I would like to see it is a little bit like this. So let's say you're standing in the sidewalk and you're standing in front of a building. That you live in that building, and in front of you is a multi-apartment store building. So there's multi-apartments. In this building, there is 4 apartments. You own the one on the top right, and you have a neighbor on the top left, which is that grumpy guy who has always go mumbles and says, "Oh, good morning." And at the bottom floor, you have a young couple, always happy, always screaming, always making good noise. And you have that old lady with the cats to the left. Now, when you go in front of the building, you have a key card, a digital key card. And the main building has a key card reader. So when you go up front, you read the key card into that door, and the door opens. Then you come in to the lobby. In the lobby, you have 4 more doors. You have the one to your own apartment. You have the one to the grumpy neighbor. You have the old lady and the young couple. So this is kind of symboling the orders API. Now we're at the orders API. If I want to go into the young couple and using my key card, I will get access denied, because I don't have access to that apartment. But if I take the stairs up and go to my apartment, I can use the key card again, and I can read it, and then I can get access and I can get in. So now I have access to my apartment inside that building. And if the grumpy neighbor comes home, he can obviously access the door as well with his own key card. And he cannot access my apartment with his key card, but if he goes to his own apartment, he's able to go in. There's also a lot of other people having access because there's a janitor working in the building. So he also has his own key card. He's going into the front door, he's opening up, and he's able to go into the young couple and do some tests or repairs. And afterwards, he can go up to my apartment and do the same, walk in again and do repairs. So he has a different access level. So this is a little bit what I want to talk about. I will talk about that part of access. So giving that into this. So the first part we were doing was the API. So now we need to look into how to actually do it for each operation. So let's jump back into my drawing again. In order to do this, we need to extend this a little bit. So we will add something, and we'll add an identity provider. An identity provider is something that you can use for creating tokens. You can use it for, it's Azure AD, it's AuthZero, it's Okta, it's several of these. But we will use today is AuthZero. So we will have AuthZero. So my identity provider can help me with a lot more access and security. So what I've done in preparations for this is to create a trust between these ones. So I will create a trust. Oh, interesting. Purple. I want to have green. Green, please. So I created a trust between these two. And I've also created a consumer of my API. So we have our consumer A. And the consumer A can then, using OAuth, get token. And then I can get that back. So I've added some extra security to my API management API, which means that from the beginning, as I mentioned, I need to have a subscription key in order to keep my access to my order API. But with this also, I have also added a token. So let's keep it in a, let's go ahead, let's go token, which I can use for more. So what I need to do now is to actually do a granular check. So to do this, I need to, I'm just going to go ahead and expand that a little bit. I need to go ahead and say, I want my neighbor, I want to be able to access create order, update order, and read my orders. Because read all orders would be something that an admin person do, and my consumer is only able to get his or her orders, because that would be really bad if they don't. Or they can get another customers, and that would be good. That would look not, that one wouldn't look that good. So what I've also done is create a representation of my API management instance in AuthZero and a representation of my consumer. So this is an application and this is an API. And I also granted access to this one. So this is the base setup that we have. And to look how this is going, we need to jump into, let's just jump into how this looks like, the whole setup. So let's start off with AuthZero. So AuthZero is an identity provider, as mentioned before. It's a little bit like Azure AD or Okta or something like that. It has similar functionality, a little bit more maybe than some of these. But in the end, we have something called APIs and something called applications. So in APIs, I have my representation of my API management instance, Blueberry API. And I have created an application that is my consumer. So this is my consumer. And if I go into my consumer, I can see that I have a bunch of APIs that I have access to, and I have access to my Blueberry API. In my API management instance, I have connected this as well, because just doing this will only give us, doing this setup in AuthZero will actually only tell us that the tokens that are generated from consumer A actually has access to access our API. And now we need to go into API management to see how this is solved. So let's go into API management, let's go into orders, and we go to V1. So in V1, we have a bunch of operations. So let's use get all orders. In the policies, so policies, for you who are new to them, is a place doing logic inside of our APIs. And in this case, I'm only focusing on actually validating the YOD token, and then I will forward this to a Azure function. Then we'll actually connect to Cosmos DB. But setting this up is pretty simple. So we have something called an OpenID config URL. This URL gives us gives API management policy all information needed to actually validate the token we're given. So this will give them all the information that it needs. Based on this, we have our setup for the valid job token. Then we can add some restrictions, and obviously we want to restrict that the token that AuthZero provides also should have a target of our API management instance, which means our instance over here, so this one. So the API audience is https://mlugberg.azureapi.net. And that's exactly what I put into audience, so this should be the same, so this is the identifier. And then I also have a filter on issuer, because potentially we could have multiple issuers, but I only want it to be from my AuthZero instance. So this is the minimal part of, for me at least, to have my security up. And let's go ahead and act as a consumer in this case, just to get the base set up. So I have prepared to get token as a consumer A. Let's go ahead. And let's go ahead and take body. And I created a token. And just for your sake, I have in a test that will store this into an environment variable access token, so I can reuse this later. So I'm not going to be needing to copy it around, but let's inspect this call. So I set an audience that should be the same, mlugberg.azure.api.net. I use client credentials and I use client ID, client secret. Both of these I've collected from AuthZero in advance, and they're easy to find on the application. I then get this access token, which I can use. And just to go ahead and inspect this one, I will use a site called yod.io. I'm guessing Nino is drawing his hair now when I use this kind of stuff regarding his session the other day. Let's use it anyway. It's no production stuff, so it's okay. So let's just paste it, and then I can inspect what's part of it. What's interesting is this payload area. I hope you can see it. Let's zoom in a bit. So what's interesting is that we got a claim, because everything in this is claims, so all of these are claims. We got a claim that is issuer, and we got a claim that is audience. So these are the ones that we actually see in our policy back here. So this is the audience, and this is the issuer. And as we can see, we have those correct ones over here. So that's good. Now I can get to my get all orders, and I can get send. As you see on headers, I'm just referring to my access token and adding bearer schema. And let's pull this out. And everything is a cold start. Let's go. Oh, awesome. Now I can get all orders. So I, as a consumer, can get all orders, and that's not so good, because in the end I get customer 1, I can get customer 2, I can get customer 3. I wouldn't be that happy if someone can look into my orders from another customer or a competitor maybe. So they are ordering different stuff for volumes or whatever you want to inspect. Not so fun. So now we have, now we're back to this part. Now we have this part. The order, when we have a validate token, we have this validate job token over here. And we can now access all APIs for this. But what we wanted to do is only give access to these ones. In order to do this, we need to create some sort of reference. So what we will do now is in AuthZero, we will create a bunch of permissions. These permissions can be used and can be authorized inside of AuthZero to this part. So a consumer can get access to different permissions. So I can connect these two. So from four possible permissions, I can add 3. So I can add create, update, read my. So those ones I can assign to that application, which means that I will be able to control who's having access to my APIs through AuthZero. And in my API management instance, I will add a claim check. Because now I want to be able to actually check a little bit more in that token. I want to peek a little bit more into the token and actually see what the consumer has access to. what kind of operation does it have access to? So let's start up with building this up in AuthZero and creating the permissions needed. Let's go ahead and do that. APIs, so let's go into my API. And yeah, it's a bunch of things. It's just standard for now, but let's go ahead and add this. So let's have a create order, create orders, update orders, order, update order. Let's just add a bunch of these so we have a few to look at. So read all orders might be interesting. Read all orders, admin feature, sounds good. And then we have read my orders. Read my orders. There we go. And we also have one more that we can add just to have it there. Read orders by customer orders. There we go. Read orders by specific customer. There we go. And we have had a bunch of permissions now. So all of these are created on our API instance in API in AuthZero. So we can add a bunch more, and we can create new ones like create invoice, update invoice, and so forth. And we just need to be a good naming standard and a good way of doing this. And it's easy to add. Let's go ahead and go and check how this looks now for our application. So in the Consumer A application, I can now go in and I can go into APIs and see what I have access to, and I have access to this MLookberry API. But soon, when we go into Edit API Management, we will not be able to only use this because we need some more information, because we will add checks on this. So in this case, I will add create order, update order, because I want them to be able to create orders and update orders. That's important for my consumer, because I want to be able to deliver something for them. And I want to be able to have read my orders. And let's go update. So now I actually added scopes into our consumer. So let's go ahead and try it out, see how the token looks like, because now the token will have a little bit different look. So as you can see, let's scroll. Let's just see if we can increase size. Sorry. As you can see, we have added scope. So scope is now populated with the permissions that I set up. And if I go in here and pick up this access token, and let's violate our security again. Let's go to this, paste it in. I actually had this one on by mistake, but doesn't matter. We can see that scope is now added and permissions is added. So permissions is a special feature actually of AuthZero, and I'm gonna go in and look at that. But scope have all my permissions and also these permissions. So let's go ahead and look how that is. So in my APIs, I can go to my MLookberry API, and I can scroll down on settings, and this is not actually enabled by default. So this is enable RBAC, and I can enable that, and then I can also enable that I want my permissions in the access token. And for me, I think this is a much simpler and neater way than using the scope. So that's why I like it and use it. And because then I get, if I remove that part, I will not have this area with me. So I'm thinking this is, I like this approach. So now I have my new scope and I have provided access. So let's just look into this, what we have done. So we have actually created these access things. Now when we get our token, we will actually get it with, permissions. So now we can get that. And next part will be to actually add this claim check. So let's go ahead and do that into our API. Easiest way of doing this is actually just creating a new one. In the docs, you can see how this validate job token looks like, and if you want to experiment with it, there's a bunch of more things that it can do. The only thing I want to do is actually do this required claims, which will be then adding the functionality that I need. So if I go in and do like that, claims, required claims, and claim name would be permissions, match, let's just have all. Separator would be needed if you use a scope. Then you will have space in this one to be able to not have string compare, which is really tough. So let's just remove that one. And then the value that I want is read all orders. There we go. Let's save that one. Oh, sorry, I should have done. You know that it works because I did it before. And let's just go ahead. Let's request this one again. And now let's go and get all orders. And now I'm unauthorized. So now I added the granularity I need to be able to do this, and also put in that we're doing this up in the AuthZero. So we're adding this security, or making it, giving permissions in our AuthZero, which makes it much simpler to do. I can just focus when I'm developing something in my order to make sure that my claim check is okay. And then I know it's all right. I don't have to do anything inside of API management, working with groups or whatever you want to do to make it accomplish. But I can actually just push that out to AuthZero and make it easier for me to have different areas where I manage accessibility. So in this way, I will push into AuthZero to actually handle the authorization and also making sure what operations in my API they actually have access to. So time's running up, so let's just have a short one. In API management, all we need to do, open a config URL and put in audience and issuer, and then add these required claims as permissions. This is easily tested in dev, in test, in production, and it makes it very easy for me as a developer to manage this, because I just need to focus on my policy on my API. And then I move everything that is more complex, like permissions and so forth, alliance into AuthZero. So I just create my API representation, and then for my consumers, I can then grant access. This is also possible for end users, actually. So this is why I like AuthZero. Then it's easier for me to give access over here. So if I go in here and actually would read all orders and click update and go again and get my token, I need to refresh the token because the token is actually containing information that it has access or not. API management is not going back to AuthZero to check it, it's in the token. So if you have given too much permissions and someone is getting that token, you have to wait until the lifetime of that token to expire before they don't have access anymore. Just remember that. And now I can actually get all orders again. Awesome. So let's go again into my PowerPoint and let's see. So key takeaways. I like permissions, not scopes. Previously, I didn't know about that split separator, so I thought it was string comparison, which I think it was in the beginning. So now scopes is easier. AuthZero is nice to use as an IDP. You can use Okta, you can use anything else. It's easy to set up machine-to-machine users, and I really like role-based access. I've seen so many cases where people are going ahead and do interesting solutions around this, trying to hide operations or build extra APIs in front of it or whatever it can be. So use something like this instead. It gives away a lot of headache, that's for sure. And let's go ahead for questions, Lex.
Yeah, indeed, good session, Matthias. Thank you. Let's indeed see. There are a couple of questions. I still have to approve one. So indeed, if you can check the accepted section, you will find 3 questions. Can you
yes,
find them?
is it possible to implement the role-based access using AD without using AuthZero? You can add the OAuth security, but there's a bit more tricky to do it in AD. You would need to add the custom properties yourself, and depending on the security of your AD, you will need someone with high securities to do that. Usually I find it too messy. So that's why I like to have something else. And AD is not that granular. It's a bit harder. The same goes with it, the question about setting permission as a role on Azure AD AuthZero. As mentioned before, it's easier to handle this in AuthZero. They have a better way of doing it. AD doesn't really have it. The extra part with using the subscription key in addition to OAuth security with AuthZero is mainly, I would say, the analytics part in API management. It's much easier to track who is going crazy on your APIs or what they're doing with your APIs. To do that, you can obviously have them open all the way, but then analytics is not going to give you any extra help out of the box. So that would be the preferable. You need to refresh, or is the?
Yeah, well, they should be popping up. I believe I accidentally dismissed one question. So there is also a question from Ahmed in the dismissed section.
Ah, okay.
The other questions, yeah, should all show up in the accepted.
AuthZero is when you need. There's a few things. So first off, it's an easier user interface. But the main big part I would say that you would use AuthZero over Azure AD is to move out like customers. So if you want to manage customers and clients, it's much easier to do that via AuthZero than adding them into Azure AD. So for internal applications, you can just use OAuth with Azure AD, but for external ones, it's easier to actually use something like AuthZero. AuthZero can also connect other ADs, so you could actually create a web of ADs connected to your instance, which makes it easier for single sign-on on customers' ADs as well, which is pretty cool actually. And not covered today.
That's the way it goes.
And for Phil Smith, is this possible with Okta? Yes, it's very similar with Okta as well. I don't know the user interface of providing permissions and so forth, but it's very similar. The setup should be very similar.
Yeah. I believe we have seen them all right, all the questions now. Yeah, awesome. No. Yeah. Oh, okay, fantastic. Well, thanks for the session.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, indeed. Well, well, I think we can just wrap up, and we will certainly be in touch, Matthias. And yeah, the audience, well, please move on to the next session for today.
Thank you, everybody, for joining my session.
Covey.co